Unofficially, the first motor race occurred just after the second automobile was produced. Those early race cars were essentially modified horse carts fitted with rudimentary engines, steering, and brakes. Over time, those early contraptions evolved into civilized road cars and dedicated race machines. Science and technology was beginning to influence automotive and racing development alike. As road cars got faster and more capable, so did their racing variants. Automotive design in this early era wasn't burdened by stiff, data-driven outcomes. The final product was often a combination of science and art blended together to make racing sculpture. Many race cars from the middle of the 20th century are still regarded as the most beautiful examples of automotive design in history and are highly sought after by collectors and racers alike. Vintage racing seeks to preserve the sights, smells, and sounds of eras past. The roaring engines and uniquely sculptured surfaces are the same, but the men and women that vintage race their machines are out there mostly to have fun. They're competing, to be sure, but their cars are not disposable tools like most modern race cars. They are instead an important part of our automotive heritage and are driven with that in mind.
I'm Brian Volkert, and my car is a 1960 Austin Healey Bug-Eye Sprite. I'm an officer this year on the board of directors. Help out where I can. I'm a CPA by training, so most of them on the finance side. Wonderful group. There's a lot of volunteerism, and they cooperate, and it's very good and enjoyable experience.
Stephen Newby.
Tess Newby.
And Devin Newby. I started racing back when these cars weren't vintage. I started racing in the late 60s, early 70s with a Bug-Eye Sprite of all things. And today you see me racing my second ever Bug-Eye Sprite that I owned in 1978, sold in 1980, and bought it back last year so I could go racing in that car again. So, you know, it's an addiction. It really gets to you. And of course, I met my wife Lori at the racetrack in Canada, Westwood, where I cut my teeth. We met up there, and we've been together for 35 years now.
So I'm Devin. I'm the crew chief for Newbie Racing. This is my wife Tess. She carries multiple titles. One of her titles, she is our RME, which is a rotating mass esthetician. She is our head detailer, and she also keeps with all the maintenance of the vehicles as well. So she helps me with repairs and that kind of thing, and she's learning as she's going. She's actually very new into the sport. She only just started when we first got together about 10 years ago. I've been around racing my whole life, as was stated before, so it's kind of funny being out here and growing up here at the racetrack. You end up with about 40 sets of parents because everybody knows you can't get away with anything, but it's an all welcoming place. It's one of those things where you have a genuine interest with everybody else and it just clicks. Everybody becomes your best friend, your neighbor. We always work together to try to help somebody out. If anybody has a failure or whatever, there's been times that we've cannibalized cars just so somebody else can go racing. And I think that's sort of the beautiful thing about this sport, is that even though we're not racing for prize money or pride or that kind of thing, we still do our damnedest to make it the best experience for everybody. And I think that's a huge thing with vintage.
Vintage racing got its start in the mid-70s on the east coast of the United States. Venues like Watkins Glen and Sebring began hosting events as early as 1973. They drew participants from all over the United States and Europe. One organization restricted entries to cars produced between 1960 and 1972, what most consider the golden age of racing. Others found enough interest from pre- and post-war enthusiasts to include cars from the 30s through the 50s. Most entrants in the early years were from sports car and Formula Series in the US and Europe. Fields were comprised of examples from Lola, Maserati, Ferrari, Jaguar, and MG, just to name a few. Most early events were divided into two classes, pre and post-war. No provisions were made for class displacement or series. They would, however, employ a split start, a strategy to put like cars together to make sure that each group got an even chance to race against like cars for at least a few laps.
I'm Debbie Briscoe.
Brad Briscoe.
And then our son would normally be here, but he's in Texas.
Yep, Chandler.
Last year I was the Sovren secretary, and this year, because we have a grandson, now we aren't here a lot. So we are traveling to and from Texas, but we race. We go out and we spend our son's inheritance. I drive a 1969 BMW 2002, and I also have a 1965 Ford Cortina. Her name is Gina the Cortina.
GT Cortina.
GT Cortina.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I drive a 1976 Greenwood Corvette. We need some mods to it. Chandler, my son, drives a 1973 BMW CSL, Jägermeister livery.
Because I think it's the family affair of it. You're out there to race and you're out there pushing it, but you're not bumping, you're not
allowed to bump and
Yeah.
touch other cars.
And it's fun. I mean,
Yep.
we're vintage, so we should be racing in vintage. Doesn't matter how the race ends, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you can all just sit down and have a beer together and tell, lies.
My name is Ernie Nagamatsu. This is my wife, wonderful ambassador wife of motorsports. Elaine is her name, and we're from Monterey Park, which is just adjacent to LA.
We've been racing all over the world, and I said, let's go somewhere we haven't been. So then Ernie thought about somewhere close to California, so Sovren came up, and it was close enough, it's just close to California, and we decided let's go there and see what it brings us. So we brought Old Yeller last year to Sovren, and even before we got here, the organization was so wonderful. They were so good in communicating and very welcoming and supportive. And when we brought the Old Yeller here to Sovren, the fans all came up, and there was fans that had seen the car race at Riverside and this and that, and they were down to earth fans.
Every one of these cars can talk a story of how it was purchased, who raced it before. These people are all custodians for a period of time, and it talks to about an uncle or a father or a brother that had one of these cars, whether it's a Mustang or a Brabham or whatever car it is, or a little Mini. They all can talk of history, and that's different than other cars, and we need that because that will carry forward.
The vintage racing community is filled with great people and a supportive family atmosphere. Come on out and be part of the fun. You can get involved in any number of ways. If you want to race, great. Find a car, get it prepped, and come on out. If something more casual is your speed, volunteer as a corner worker, a race official, or as race support. We'd love to see you at the track.